Good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Sleeping with the Dinosaurs. Tonight, we journey far beyond the reach of human memory, across millions upon millions of years, to an ancient land bathed in warm sunlight and heavy with the scent of flowering plants. It is a world where giants walk slowly across vast plains, their footsteps shaking the very earth beneath them, and where one creature in particular rules the meadows and woodlands with a quiet but unshakable majesty. This is the realm of the Triceratops, the three-horned face, a creature whose silhouette is as unmistakable today as it was in the final days of the dinosaurs. We will explore its world in patient detail, the texture of its skin, the curve of its horns, the gentle swish of its tail, and the whispered story its fossils still tell. You will hear of its battles, its quiet moments, and the life it carved out in the waning age of the great reptiles. Before we begin our slow walk into this Cretaceous night, I ask you to take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another prehistoric journey, and share in the comments below where you are listening from tonight. Whether you are beneath the glow of city lights, wrapped in the soft darkness of a countryside evening, or drifting at sea under endless stars, tonight we will walk together into the world of Triceratops. Imagine, if you will, stepping out into a land that feels both alien and familiar, a place where the air is heavy with warmth and moisture, where each breath carries the scent of resin from towering conifers, and where the low hum of insect life rises from the undergrowth in a ceaseless summer chorus. The year is somewhere around 68 million years ago, and you are standing on a continent that in the future will be known as North America. But here and now it is a wild, sprawling land without cities or roads, without the sound of human voices, a place shaped entirely by wind, water, and the rhythms of life and death among creatures long vanished. The sun is lowering toward the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, though the light is diffused by a thin veil of humidity. The ground beneath your feet is firm in some places, and soft in others, shaped by ancient rivers that twist and curve like ribbons of silver through the landscape. These rivers carry silt and sand from faraway highlands, feeding broad floodplains where life gathers in abundance. Along the banks, the soil is dark and rich, home to clusters of horsetails, ferns and low cycads whose fronds sway in the faint evening breeze. Farther back from the water's edge, groves of conifers rise in patient stillness. These are not quite the forests you know today. No pines or spruces in tidy alpine lines, but vast irregular stands of ancient relatives, with bark as rough as weathered stone and needles that whisper together in a language older than humankind. Mixed among them are broad-leaved plants, the angiosperms, still relatively new arrivals in the plant kingdom, their flowers opening like splashes of color against a sea of green. They perfume the air in fleeting waves, scents carried and reshaped by the shifting wind. Above you, the sky is far from empty. The last light of day glints off leathery wings as pterosaurs glide on invisible currents, their long, slender silhouettes tracing slow arcs against the horizon. In the shallows, turtles stir with lazy movements, their shells catching the sun like polished shields. Somewhere nearby, an Edmontosaurus bellows, a low, resonant call that echoes through the valley and makes the water's surface shiver. Its voice is answered from far away, a reminder that this is a world alive with conversation, though not in words you could understand. It is a warm time in Earth's history. The polar ice caps are all but absent, and the seas are higher than they will be for tens of millions of years to come. Much of what will one day be the interior of the North American continent is flooded by a shallow inland sea, splitting the land into two great masses. You are on the western side, in a region paleontologists will one day call Laramidia, a long, narrow strip of land running from what will become Alaska down into Mexico. Here the seasons are gentle, the winters mild, the summers long and verdant. Storms sweep across the plains without warning, bringing sheets of rain that swell the rivers and feed the wetlands before moving on to reveal skies as wide and endless as the dreams of this ancient world. The air is rich in carbon dioxide compared to the modern day, and plant life thrives with an intensity you can almost taste. Forests press in close to the waterways, their edges spilling into open meadows where low vegetation dominates. These open spaces are not empty. They are stages upon which some of the largest creatures ever to walk the earth perform their quiet, everyday dramas. It is here in this mingling of forest and plain that you might first catch sight of the being we have come to see. From the shadows of a distant grove, a movement, deliberate, steady, unhurried, draws your eye. You watch as a figure emerges, framed by the green of the ferns and the fading light of the sun. At first it is only a shape, massive and broad, with a certain grounded grace. Then the details begin to resolve: a sturdy body, the skin patterned with faint scales like the surface of ancient bark, limbs thick and sure, ending in stout three-toed feet, a head crowned with a great shield of bone, its edge tracing a wide arc above the neck. Even from this distance, the three horns are visible, two long forward-curving lances above the eyes, and a shorter, sharper point rising from the nose. This is the Triceratops, though of course it does not know that name. It is simply itself, a living, breathing presence in the final age of the dinosaurs. At this moment it stands at the border of forest and meadow, pausing to survey the land before it. You can almost hear the slow rhythm of its breath, the faint rustle of leaves as it shifts its weight from one massive foot to the other. Around it, life goes on. Small mammals, little more than shadows with twitching noses, scurry through the ferns gathering seeds. Insects hover in the still air, their wings catching glimmers of gold from the setting sun. Somewhere in the canopy, a bird-like dinosaur calls sharply, the sound ringing clear before fading into the distance. The world is a web of small moments, each connected, each shaping and shaped by the others. If you could feel the ground as the Triceratops moves, you would sense the deep thump of its footsteps through the soles of your feet. It steps forward with measured purpose, head low, the broad beak at the front of its face poised to crop the tough stems of a low cycad. Its mouth works in slow, powerful bites, the shearing teeth inside reducing the plant to pulp. The movement is not hurried. It has no need to rush. There is enough food here and enough time before the coolness of night settles over the land. The evening deepens and the light takes on a softer hue. Above, the first stars blink into being, though they are partially hidden by drifting clouds. The air cools only slightly, just enough for a thin mist to begin rising from the damp earth near the river. The calls of the larger animals grow less frequent, replaced by the quiet susurration of night insects and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface of the water. Somewhere farther away than you can see, another Triceratops might be feeding or resting or simply standing in the moonlight. Here, at the end of the Cretaceous, this is the rhythm of life. The landscape, rich and green, is shaped by forces both slow and sudden. The slow growth of forests, the gradual shifting of rivers, the sudden arrival of a storm, or the passing shadow of a predator. Every creature here is part of that balance, including the Triceratops, whose size and strength make it both secure and vulnerable in equal measure. And so, with the last of the day's light fading into night, we stand in the stillness of this ancient world, listening to the heartbeat of the late Cretaceous. The land is alive, the air is warm, and somewhere nearby, the three-horned face moves quietly among the plants, as it has done countless times before. From here, our journey will draw closer to this remarkable creature, to see not only its form but the story etched in every line of its horns, every plait of its frill, every track it leaves in the damp soil. The first time you truly see a Triceratops, not as a shadow in the distance, not as a hint of movement between the ferns, but as a full living being standing before you. The mind struggles to take it all in. The scale alone is something that resists quick comprehension. This is not an animal that fits neatly into modern comparisons. Its body is a fortress of muscle and bone, 4 sturdy legs planted like the columns of a temple, and above it all rises that unmistakable head, crowned with the most iconic adornments in the prehistoric world. The light at this hour is soft, filtered through a thin veil of clouds, giving everything a gentle golden edge. It falls across the creature's frill, a great fan-shaped plate of bone that spreads outward and upward from the back of the skull. The frill is not smooth. Ridges and shallow depressions play across its surface, each catching the light in a slightly different way. Faint vascular grooves hint at the living tissue that once covered it, the skin perhaps flush with blood in moments of agitation or display, turning a deeper hue under the right conditions. Then there are the horns. The 2 above the eyes are long, elegantly curved weapons, though here they are not glinting steel but living bone sheathed in a keratin layer, the same material that makes up the beaks of birds and the horns of modern antelope. These horns taper to sharp points, and their length is such that you imagine they could span the height of a grown human from foot to crown. The nasal horn, shorter and sturdier, rises from the snout like a guard post, a direct challenge to anything that might approach head-on. Its eyes, set deep beneath the brow ridges, are not the cold, unblinking orbs of a reptile in some old-fashioned imagining, but large, expressive, and alive with quiet intelligence. They scan the surrounding meadow with deliberate care, pausing now and then to rest upon some distant movement, or to glance toward the sound of rustling leaves. Within their depths, you see a creature attuned to its world in ways humans can only guess at, an animal whose senses have been honed over millions of years to detect the subtle signs of both danger and opportunity. The skin is a patchwork of textures, each scale catching the light differently. Along the flanks, the surface is pebbled like old leather, while around the limbs and neck, the folds and creases show where the skin stretches and moves with the body's weight. Paleontologists have found impressions of Triceratops skin in stone, revealing these patterns, small, irregular polygonal scales, some larger and more pronounced along certain parts of the body, perhaps offering a degree of protection or display. The coloration, though lost to time, is easy to imagine in muted earth tones, perhaps mottled with darker bands or spots to help it blend into the dappled light of the forest edge. The head itself is massive, so much so that it accounts for nearly 1/3 of the animal's entire length. To see it in motion is to understand that this is no static display. As the Triceratops moves, the horns and frill sway gently with each step, the neck muscles shifting beneath the skin in powerful ripples. When it lowers its head toward the ground, whether to graze or to assess something more closely, the sheer bulk of the skull makes the movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. It takes another step forward, the weight of its body pressing the damp soil into deep impressions. Each foot is a study in adaptation, the front feet with 5 short toes, the rear with 4, each tipped with a small, blunt, hoof-like claw. These feet do not run quickly, but they carry the animal with the steady assurance of a creature that has no need to flee unless absolutely necessary. As it moves closer to a patch of low-growing cycads, you hear the faint scrape of its beak cutting through fibrous stems. The beak itself is sharp and curved, reminiscent of a parrot's, though scaled up to a size that could shear through branches as thick as a man's wrist. Once the plant is gripped, the back teeth take over, arranged in dental batteries that work like rows of shearing blades, grinding plant matter into a pulp ready for digestion. Each bite is a slow, deliberate act, and the sound of it, a combination of crunch and tear, is the steady rhythm of its feeding life. Its breathing is audible, a deep, steady draw and release of air through wide nostrils at the front of its snout. Occasionally it pauses, lifting its head to taste the air, perhaps catching the faintest trace of another Triceratops somewhere beyond your sight, or detecting the distant, almost imperceptible scent of a predator. And then, without hurry, it turns slightly to one side, giving you a clearer view of the frill's profile. This great plate of bone, edged with small knobs and scallops, serves more than one purpose. Some scientists believe it is a display structure, used to signal health, strength, or readiness to mate. Others see it as a defensive shield, a barrier protecting the vulnerable neck from the bite of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Still others suggest it could help regulate body temperature, the blood vessels just beneath the skin releasing excess heat. In the living animal, it may well serve all these roles at once, a multifunctional marvel evolved over countless generations. For a moment, it stands perfectly still, only the gentle swish of its tail moving through the air. The tail is not as long as those of some dinosaurs, but it is thick at the base, tapering to a flexible tip, and it acts as a counterbalance for the heavy head. Its position can also signal mood, lowered in rest, raised slightly in alertness, or swished from side to side to brush away insects in the warm Cretaceous air. The smell of the creature reaches you now, earthy and musky, carrying the scent of the plants it has been eating, the soil it has walked through, and the living warmth of its body. It is a reminder that this is no statue of bone and stone, but a breathing presence, each heartbeat fueling the muscles that carry it through this lush and dangerous world. In the stillness, you notice details you might otherwise have missed. A small scar on the edge of the frill, perhaps the mark of an old clash with a rival. The faint ripple of skin as a fly lands and is twitched away, the way the muscles at the base of the horns flex as it lowers its head once more to feed. Each of these tells a story, not the grand story of extinction or evolution, but the small personal story of one animal's life in this ancient place. And so your first true glimpse of the three-horned face is not just a meeting of eyes or a study of shape. It is an immersion in presence, a moment where time folds in on itself, and the late Cretaceous breathes again through the slow, steady movements of a creature that has walked this land for millions of years. As the Triceratops steps away toward the deeper meadow, the light fades further, and the shadows lengthen across its back. Soon it will find a place to rest for the night, perhaps in the shelter of the trees or on a rise where the open land offers a clear view of any approach. You too will follow, for there is more yet to see. The armor of bone that makes this creature both beautiful and formidable, and the mysteries it still holds in the silent language of fossil and stone. The closer you draw to a Triceratops, the more you realize that its most striking features, the great frill and three imposing horns, are not simply ornaments, they are living armor, shaped by millions of years of survival in a world where danger often arrived without warning. In the fading light of the late Cretaceous evening, the details of these structures come into sharper focus, and their complexity becomes all the more remarkable. The frill rises like a fortress wall from the back of the skull, broad and tall, yet intricately shaped. The outer edge is not a perfect curve but is marked by scallops and small triangular protrusions, giving it an uneven silhouette that catches shadows in unexpected ways. This is not a thin plate. Fossil evidence shows that in Triceratops, the frill was solid bone, unlike some other ceratopsians whose frills were lighter and had large openings. Here, solidity is a statement. It is a barrier between the vulnerable neck and whatever might try to reach it. Yet to think of the frill only as a shield is to miss its other possibilities. Imagine this great surface covered in living skin, perhaps patterned with markings unique to each individual, or flushed with blood to display brighter colors when needed. If the frill's vascular grooves served to channel warm blood close to the surface, it might have shifted its shade subtly, perhaps deepening during moments of tension, much like how some modern reptiles change their hue. In the presence of a rival or a mate, such changes could transform the frill from a simple wall of bone into a living banner. The horns above the eyes are equally captivating. Long and sweeping forward, they curve just enough to seem elegant, even as they project formidable force. In the living animal, they were sheathed in a layer of keratin, the same material found in the horns of modern bison or rhinoceros. This sheath may have extended their length slightly, and given them a polished, almost gleaming surface when kept free of dirt and wear. They are not static tools. They are part of the Triceratops' expressive body language. When the animal lowers its head in warning, the horns tilt forward like lances poised for a charge. When relaxed, the head is carried lower to the ground, the horns angled less aggressively. In a confrontation with another of its kind, these horns may meet with a sharp crack, sliding along one another before locking in a contest of strength. Fossilized skulls tell this tale. Many bear healed lesions or damage in places that correspond exactly to where horns would clash, suggesting that such battles were not rare. The nasal horn, shorter but no less important, rises from the snout like a central spike, positioned to reinforce the line of defense. While it may not have the same reach as the brow horns, its placement makes it a perfect tool for delivering close-range thrusts or for hooking under an opponent's frill during a duel. Some paleontologists have suggested it might have been used for digging or rooting among tough plants, though its shape seems more in keeping with defense and display. As you watch the Triceratops move through the meadow, you see how these features work together. The frill forms a broad, unmissable backdrop that frames the horns, making them appear even longer and more formidable. This combined silhouette would have been an unmistakable warning to any predator lurking nearby. Even a Tyrannosaurus rex, the apex predator of this land, would have to think twice before charging such a well-defended target head-on. But this armor is not without its vulnerabilities. The horns, though strong, are living structures and could be broken in fierce combat. The frill, while dense, could suffer cracks from a powerful enough blow. Each healed scar or fracture on fossil skulls is a reminder that these defenses were tested often, not just in the rare emergencies of predator attack, but in the frequent, smaller battles for dominance among the Triceratops themselves. From a functional standpoint, the frill and horns represent a trade-off between protection, communication, and the demands of carrying such weight. The skull of a Triceratops could measure over 8 feet from beak to frill, an immense structure requiring powerful neck muscles to support. The cervical vertebrae at the base of the neck were robust and reinforced, anchoring muscles that allowed the animal to swing its head with surprising speed when necessary. Even so, moving such a structure took energy, and so every motion of the head is purposeful, whether to feed, to display, or to defend. And yet, the armor's role in communication might be just as important as its defensive function. In the quiet of the meadow, the Triceratops lifts its head toward a sound, perhaps another of its kind calling from beyond the trees. The profile of the frill and horns is unmistakable against the dimming sky. In this world, visual signals travel far across open land, and a well-positioned frill can act like a flag in the wind, carrying a message without a single sound. Consider, too, the possibility that the frill's shape helped members of the same species recognize one another. Among modern animals, subtle differences in horn shape or coloration help distinguish individuals or even indicate age and status. The Triceratops frill may have served a similar purpose, allowing a quick assessment of whether a newcomer was a rival, a potential mate, or a familiar companion. The material of this armor, bone, tells its own story. Fossils show the texture of the frill's surface, the way it connected to the rest of the skull, and even the microscopic structure of its growth. Like tree rings, bone can hold traces of an animal's history, signs of injury and repair, growth spurts, and the slow thickening that comes with age. In some cases, paleontologists have found that older individuals bear heavier scars, their frills marked by years of conflict, while younger ones show smoother edges and fewer blemishes. This balance of beauty and function makes the Triceratops armor unique even among the horned dinosaurs. Many of its relatives had elaborate frills with openings, frills shaped into spikes or horns arranged in different ways. But Triceratops, with its solid frill and forward-sweeping brow horns, seems built for both intimidation and durability. A warrior's design refined by the needs of its particular environment. In the stillness of evening, you can imagine the effect this armor would have on a predator emerging from the shadows. The great frill, catching the last rays of sunlight, would blaze like a shield, the horns framing a face that seems unflinching. The message is clear: this is not an easy meal. Even if hunger drove the predator forward, the cost of such an attack could be high, and in the delicate economy of survival, such risks are not taken lightly. the Triceratops takes a few more steps, its head swaying slightly from side to side, scanning the land ahead. Each motion sends a subtle ripple down the muscles of its neck, and you begin to appreciate how much of this creature's life is shaped by the burden and benefit of its armor. It is a constant companion, protection that cannot be laid aside, a weight that must be carried every waking moment, and yet also a symbol of its place in the world. As the animal finally moves toward the shelter of a stand of conifers, the frill and horns are the last features to disappear from view, the pale edges of bone briefly catching the moonlight before they fade into shadow. This living fortress has moved on, leaving only the memory of its silent warning in the air. The night deepens now, but our journey is far from over. Ahead lies another part of this creature's life, one defined not by the clash of horns or the stillness of watchfulness, but by the steady rhythm of sustenance, the daily gathering of the green abundance that fuels a giant. And so we will follow into the next moment, where the Triceratops lowers its great head not in battle but in the timeless act of feeding. The life of a giant herbivore is written in green. Every day the Triceratops wakes to a world where its survival depends not on the chase or the kill, but on the patient, endless act of feeding, drawing energy from the ancient sunlight locked within leaves, stems, and seeds. To understand this creature, we must walk alongside it not just in moments of confrontation or stillness, but in the quiet rhythm of grazing, browsing, and chewing, hour after hour. It is early morning now in the Late Cretaceous, the first light spilling across the meadows and catching on the dew-beaded fronds of ferns. The air is cooler than it will be later in the day, and the mist still clings to the hollows of the land, curling low over the ground like pale smoke. From the edge of the forest, a Triceratops emerges, its movements unhurried but purposeful. The day's first order of business is food, and there is no shortage of it here. The landscape stretches in a mosaic of green, dense stands of cycads with their crown of stiff spiny leaves, carpets of horsetails along the wetter ground, low flowering shrubs with pale blossoms opening to greet the sun. Scattered among these are taller conifers, their lower branches stripped bare by countless feeding mouths, leaving only the upper reaches safe from herbivorous reach. These plants are not random. They are the result of millions of years of coevolution between flora and the massive plant eaters that roam here. Some grow tough, fibrous leaves to slow the bite of grazers. Others develop chemical defenses, bitter tastes, or mild toxins that discourage all but the most determined feeders. But the Triceratops is well equipped for such challenges. Its beak, sharp and curved, is the first tool in this green economy. With a tilt of the head, the Triceratops can shear through the fibrous stalk of a cycad leaf, severing it cleanly before pulling the leaf into its mouth. Inside, an array of teeth waits, not scattered or isolated like in many reptiles, but arranged in what paleontologists call dental batteries. These are tightly packed rows of teeth that work together like the blades of a saw or the teeth of a mill, grinding plant matter into a digestible mash. As one tooth wears down, another grows in to take its place, ensuring a lifetime supply of cutting edges. The sound of feeding is rhythmic, a repeated crunch, chew, and swallow, punctuated by the occasional tearing of a tougher branch. Each mouthful is measured. The Triceratops does not gulp its food hastily. Its size gives it the luxury of time, though it still must consume vast quantities to fuel its massive body. Estimates suggest it may have eaten hundreds of pounds of vegetation in a single day, a slow but constant intake that shapes nearly every waking moment. The plants themselves tell a story of the season. In this part of the Cretaceous year, flowering plants are in full bloom, their blossoms drawing insects and small bird-like dinosaurs to feed on nectar and pollen. The Triceratops pays little attention to these, focusing instead on leaves and stems, though in the process it may swallow flowers whole. Such accidental feeding makes the Triceratops a participant in the ancient dance of pollination, spreading seeds in its droppings and shaping the plant community simply by existing. Occasionally, the Triceratops lifts its head to browse higher, stretching its neck to strip foliage from a conifer's lower branches. The texture here is different. The needles release a resinous scent when crushed, filling the air with the sharp aroma of ancient pine. This diversity of plants ensures a varied diet, which not only provides balanced nutrition, but may help the animal avoid the harmful effects of consuming too much of any one plant's chemical defenses. The feeding is not a solitary act. While Triceratops is often imagined as a solitary animal, it is not unusual to find another individual feeding within sight, perhaps a smaller one, a younger animal not yet grown to full size. They may not feed shoulder to shoulder, but they move within a loose awareness of one another, a quiet acknowledgement of shared space and purpose. The occasional glance, the tilt of the frill, is enough to maintain a respectful distance. As the sun rises higher, the warmth stirs other herbivores into activity. Far across the meadow, a group of Edmontosaurus begins to feed, their beaks plucking at the low vegetation. The presence of so many large plant eaters speaks to the richness of the land. Here there is enough to sustain giants, but only because they each fill slightly different roles. The Edmontosaurus prefer softer plants and graze in open areas, while the Triceratops can tackle tougher, woodier material at the forest's edge. This division reduces competition and allows each species to thrive in its own way. In feeding, the Triceratops shapes its environment as much as the environment shapes it. By stripping leaves, breaking branches, and trampling smaller plants underfoot, it opens space for sunlight to reach the ground, encouraging new growth. Seeds caught in its frill or skin may be carried to new places, planting the next generation of the forest as it wanders. Its dung, rich in nutrients, fertilizes the soil, returning the elements of the plants it consumes back to the earth. There is a rhythm to the day: feed for a time, rest in the shade, then feed again. The digestive system of a Triceratops is likely vast, a fermentation chamber where microbes break down tough cellulose into usable energy. The process takes hours, even days, and so the animal's life is one of steady, deliberate intake, balanced by long periods of rumination and rest. Near midday, the Triceratops moves toward a wetter part of the meadow where horsetails grow in dense stands. These ancient plants, unchanged for millions of years, are high in silica, giving them a slightly gritty texture. Many modern herbivores avoid such plants, but the Triceratops' teeth are built for wear, and it feeds without hesitation, pulling up whole stalks and chewing them into pulp. The feeding here is accompanied by the quiet lap of water against the shore and the distant calls of creatures hidden in the trees. Every so often, the Triceratops pauses, lifting its head and standing motionless, eyes scanning the horizon. It is not paranoia, but instinct. The act of feeding, with the head down and attention focused on the plants before it, is a moment of vulnerability. A predator could take advantage of such distraction, and so the Triceratops listens for the faintest sign, a snapping branch, the sudden silence of birds, the distant rumble of movement. Only when it is satisfied does it return to its meal. The afternoon wears on, and the meadow hums with life. Insects drift in lazy clouds, some alighting briefly on the Triceratops' flanks before being flicked away by a swish of its tail. The sun warms the creature's back, and the heat rises in shimmering waves from the ground. Still, the feeding continues as it must. For a creature of this size, each day is a journey measured in mouthfuls, and the land provides as long as the animal moves steadily through it. As the sun dips toward the horizon once more, the Triceratops has made its way across the meadow to another stand of cycads. Here the plants grow taller, their thick trunks topped with a spray of stiff leaves. The beak slices through them with the same deliberate precision as before, the rhythm of chewing unbroken. Soon night will fall, and the cooler air will bring a pause to the day's grazing. But for now, the great herbivore feeds on, a living engine powered by the green abundance of its world. And so we see that in the life of the Triceratops. Strength is not just in the clash of horns or the defiance of predators. It is in the patient, unending work of feeding, the partnership with the plants that sustain it, and the role it plays in shaping the very land it walks upon. In this, it is both a consumer and a creator, part of the endless cycle that defines the Late Cretaceous. When the last light fades, we will follow it into another part of its existence, a quieter, more social side, where questions remain about whether these giants roamed alone or in the company of their own kind. The Triceratops, so imposing in its armor of bone, so deliberate in its feeding, carries with it one of the most intriguing questions in paleontology. Was this giant of the Late Cretaceous a creature of company, or did it prefer the lonely paths of the open plains? The truth, as is so often the case with life from deep time, is hidden in the spaces between fossil bones and the patterns they leave behind. Yet here, in the quiet of this ancient evening, we can imagine both possibilities, and in doing so come closer to understanding the rhythms of its life. The meadow we have followed it through today now lies bathed in the low amber light of sunset. In the far distance, a shadow moves across the land, another Triceratops, or perhaps something else entirely. The individual before us raises its head, its gaze fixed on the distant shape. The gesture is subtle, but the attention is unmistakable. The recognition of another being, especially one of its own kind, could carry many meanings: curiosity, caution, the first stirrings of competition, or even the comfort of familiarity. Fossil evidence offers conflicting hints. In places where the remains of Triceratops have been unearthed, they are most often found alone, as isolated skeletons rather than in clustered groups. This has led some researchers to suggest that these dinosaurs may have been largely solitary, especially in adulthood, with only brief periods of social interaction during mating or territorial disputes. Yet other sites have revealed the bones of multiple individuals close together, perhaps suggesting small groups or family units that moved and fed together. If the Triceratops was solitary, it would not be an unusual pattern among large herbivores. Modern rhinoceroses, for example, often live alone, coming together only for breeding or in areas of particularly abundant food and water. Solitude can reduce competition for resources and limit the spread of disease. For an animal as large as a Triceratops, with an appetite that demands a constant supply of fresh vegetation, roaming alone could have been an efficient way to avoid stripping an area bare too quickly. But if it did form groups, even small ones, there are equally compelling advantages. Safety in numbers is a powerful principle in the natural world, and the presence of multiple pairs of eyes and ears can increase the chances of spotting a predator before it gets too close. Young Triceratops in particular would have been vulnerable to the region's apex hunters, and a group could provide them with the protection of many frills and horns turned outward toward danger. Here in the twilight, we imagine a scene somewhere between these extremes. The Triceratops before us lowers its head again, resuming its steady grazing, but it does not stray far from the line of sight with the other shape in the distance. A light breeze stirs the tall cycads, carrying with it scents and sounds, faint vibrations of movement, perhaps even low, resonant calls too deep for the human ear to register. These signals could serve to maintain contact over long distances, a quiet acknowledgement that they share the same land without the need to gather closely. Among modern herbivores, there are species that exhibit such loose social structures. They may not move in tight-knit herds like wildebeest, but they exist in overlapping home ranges, occasionally coming together when conditions favor it. A patch of particularly lush vegetation, a water source, or a shared path through the forest. The Triceratops may have lived much the same way, bound not by rigid group dynamics, but by a shifting network of individual ranges and chance encounters. The presence of another individual also raises the question of interaction. How would two Triceratops greet one another? Would they approach cautiously, circling at a distance before lowering their heads in recognition? Or would they close the space more boldly, horns lifted slightly, as if to signal readiness for whatever might come, whether that be a friendly exchange, a subtle dominance display, or the first probing steps toward a physical contest? Fossil skulls show us that such contests could be intense. Healed wounds along the frill edges and horn bases suggest that individuals sometimes locked horns in combat, pushing against one another with the full strength of their massive bodies. These bouts may have been part of establishing dominance, securing territory, or competing for mates. In such cases, even a loosely social species would have moments where individuals came face to face in direct competition. But not every meeting would end in a clash. In our imagined scene, the distant figure now moves slowly closer, its shape resolving into the unmistakable outline of another Triceratops. The first stands still, head lifted, watching. The second pauses at the edge of the meadow, perhaps testing the air for scent. They remain like this for a long moment, the space between them alive with unspoken signals, posture, head angle, the slow sway of the tail. When the second finally steps forward into the open, it is at an angle, not a direct approach. The first responds in kind, moving to feed on a patch of low vegetation without turning away completely. It is a conversation in body language, one in which both parties weigh the risks and rewards of proximity. Eventually they settle into a rhythm, not together in the way a tightly bonded herd might be, but close enough to acknowledge each other's presence. This shared space may last for hours or only minutes, depending on the mood of the animals and the abundance of food. If Triceratops did gather more closely, it is possible such groupings were seasonal. Many modern herbivores form larger aggregations during specific times of the year, often tied to mating or migration. For the Triceratops, the late Cretaceous world offered seasonal shifts in vegetation and climate that could have drawn individuals together in certain areas. A particularly lush floodplain, for example, might support multiple animals at once, with the natural abundance allowing them to tolerate one another's presence. It is also possible that younger Triceratops lived in small groups for mutual protection, only becoming solitary as they reached full size and strength. Juveniles may have followed an older, more experienced individual, perhaps a mother, learning feeding routes and safe resting places. Such behavior would leave little trace in the fossil record, but in the logic of survival it makes sense. The fading light casts long shadows across the meadow now. The two Triceratops, our companion and the newcomer, drift apart slightly, each finding a separate patch of greenery. There is no rush to leave, but no compulsion to remain together either. In the deepening quiet, they are like two ships at anchor in the same calm bay, close enough to see each other's lanterns but each riding their own currents. And so, whether these giants were truly solitary wanderers or members of a shifting, loosely bound society, their lives were shaped by a delicate balance between connection and independence. Too much closeness might mean competition for resources. Too much distance could mean vulnerability to predators. In this ancient dance, each step was taken with the instincts of countless generations guiding them. As darkness falls, the shapes fade into the gloom, their presence marked only by the occasional sound of heavy footsteps or the low rustle of plants. The question remains, herd or solitary? And perhaps it always will. But in this moment, watching them move through the evening mist, the answer feels less important than the grace of their coexistence, however fleeting it might be. Ahead lies another side of the Triceratops' life, one where those horns and frill are not simply symbols of presence but tools in the primal rituals of rivalry. The stillness will give way to the sound of bone striking bone, the dance of strength and endurance that has played out on these plains for millions of years. The meadow is still in the cool blue light of early morning, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fresh vegetation. Somewhere in the distance, a low, resonant call rolls across the land, deep enough that it seems to vibrate in your chest. It is not the high, urgent cry of alarm, nor the soft chuff of recognition. This sound carries a different weight, a message older than language itself, a challenge. You turn toward the sound, and soon see movement along the far edge of the clearing. A Triceratops emerges, head held high, the great frill and horns catching the first rays of sunlight. But it is not alone. Another follows, matching its stride. These are not companions. The space between them is charged, their postures alert, their tails held still and straight behind them. They are not here to share grazing rights. They are here to measure one another. Among the Triceratops, rivalry is not a matter of casual skirmish. Each confrontation is a high-stakes negotiation, played out in slow, deliberate steps that can escalate into violent clashes. The reasons for such duels are many: the defense of a feeding territory, the assertion of dominance, or the competition for access to a mate. In this world, status is not granted, it is earned, and it is remembered. The two approach one another in a steady, almost ceremonial manner. Their steps are deliberate, the ground trembling faintly with each impact of their massive feet. When they stop, it is at a distance that allows them to see each other in full profile. Each tilts its head slightly to the side, angling the frill toward the other, perhaps to show off its size or the patterns of any scars and marks. This is a silent declaration. Look upon my strength. See the battles I have survived. For a long moment, neither moves. The air between them feels taut, stretched thin by their focus. In this stillness, you can hear the faint creak of their breath, the slow flex of muscle under skin. Their eyes do not leave each other. If either is uncertain, it does not show. The first motion comes in the form of a step forward, slow but unmistakable. The second answers with the same, closing the gap by a pace. Then comes the first real display, the lowering of the head until the brow horns point forward, the frill tilted slightly to seem even larger. The second mirrors the gesture. This is the beginning of the ritual, a set of movements that, if neither backs down, will lead to the clash of bone and horn. Not every rivalry ends in full combat. Often these displays are enough to settle matters. A smaller or less confident individual might turn away after such an exchange, conceding without the need for physical risk. But today, neither seems willing to yield. The steps become quicker, the distance shorter. The air is alive now with the sound of their deep, rumbling calls, a sound that seems to pulse through the ground itself. And then they meet. The collision is not a blind rush, but a calculated engagement. Their brow horns slide against one another, seeking purchase until with a sharp crack they lock together. Muscles in their necks and shoulders bulge as each pushes forward, hooves digging into the soil. The ground beneath them begins to tear under the force, clumps of dirt flung aside as they strain against each other's weight. This is not a momentary shove. It is a sustained contest of strength and stamina. Each tries to force the other's head to the side, to break the lock and create an opening. Their breaths come in sharp bursts, nostrils flaring wide, strings of moisture catching the light as they exhale. The tension in their bodies is palpable. The flex and release of muscle, the shifting of weight, the faint quiver in the frill as strain passes through the skull. Occasionally, one will twist suddenly, attempting to hook a horn under the other's frill. Such a maneuver, if successful, could unbalance the opponent and open them to a decisive shove. But these are seasoned combatants. Each counters with a shift of the head or a quick backward step, refusing to be caught off guard. From time to time they break apart, stepping back with a heavy exhale before circling each other in slow, deliberate arcs. These pauses are not a retreat but a moment to reassess, to find a better angle, to gather strength for another engagement. Dust rises around them, clinging to their hides, the sun now high enough to throw sharp shadows across their backs. The sounds of the duel are as vivid as the sight. The grind of horn against horn, the deep thud as a foot stomps into the earth, the low grunts of effort. These are the noises that would have carried across the plains, signals to any who heard them that a contest of dominance was underway. Each renewed charge carries with it a fresh burst of energy. They lock again, pushing, twisting, testing. The force is enough that even a misstep could result in injury. A horn slipping past the guard, a stumble that leads to a fall, and injuries do happen. Fossils of Triceratops skulls show punctures and cracks along the frill, evidence of horns piercing bone. Some of these wounds healed, meaning the animals survived such blows. Others show no sign of healing, perhaps marking a fatal encounter. Minutes stretch on in this contest. each moment a test of endurance. Gradually, the balance begins to shift. One of the Triceratops manages to angle its opponent's head just enough to push forward with greater force. The other braces, feet sliding slightly in the churned soil. A low, guttural bellow escapes from the one being pushed, the sound raw and edged with frustration. The final moment comes not with a dramatic throw, but with the slow, grinding inevitability of strength overpowering resistance. One is forced to take a step back, then another. The horns disengage, and the victor steps forward with head high, frill flared wide in unmistakable triumph. The defeated one holds its head low for a moment longer before turning away, moving off at a steady pace. There is no pursuit. The contest is over, the matter decided. In the aftermath, both carry the marks of the duel, small abrasions along the horns, streaks of dust and torn vegetation caught in the frill. The victor returns to feeding, as though the clash was just another part of the day's work. The loser moves farther afield, perhaps to find another meadow or to rest in the shade, the sting of defeat softened by the knowledge that survival is still its greatest achievement. These battles, for all their intensity, serve a purpose beyond the immediate win or loss. They reinforce the social fabric of the Triceratops world, establishing hierarchies that may determine who controls the best feeding grounds or who gains access to a mate. Such order can reduce the need for constant fighting. Once dominance is established, posture and presence alone may be enough to maintain it. As the sun dips toward the horizon once more, the meadow returns to its earlier stillness. The victor stands in the soft light, breathing slowly now, the dust settling on its hide. The frill, marked and weathered, catches the last golden rays, a living testament to the battles it has fought and survived. Somewhere in the shadows of the forest, the other moves on, carrying with it the lessons of the day. And so, the dance of rivalry is not simply about aggression or the proving of strength. It is a dialogue in the language of horn and muscle, a ritual as old as the species itself, played out countless times across the plains of Laramidia. Each duel is a thread in the tapestry of their lives, binding them to the instincts and traditions that have shaped their kind for millions of years. Ahead in the shifting light of the Late Cretaceous, another scene waits, one where the Triceratops moves not among rivals but among the other giants of its world, sharing the land with creatures as formidable and strange as itself. Here the measure of survival is not only in the duel, but in the balance of the entire ecosystem. The Triceratops is a giant in its own right, a living fortress of horn and bone, but here in the waning days of the Cretaceous, it is far from the only behemoth to walk the land. This world is filled with other titans, some peaceful, some deadly, and each has carved out a place in the great web of life that binds them together. To walk with the Triceratops is to walk in a realm where size and strength are common currencies, and where even the mightiest must navigate the presence of other giants. The land itself seems built for such creatures. The wide, open floodplains stretch for miles, broken by clusters of conifers and flowering plants. Ancient rivers snake through the lowlands, their banks alive with ferns and cycads, the water reflecting a sky vast and unbroken by the silhouettes of mountains. The air is warm and heavy, with the scent of plant resin, carried from the forests by slow-moving breezes. These conditions have given rise to an ecosystem where immense herbivores can thrive, but they are not alone in their claim to the land. To the east, a group of Edmontosaurus grazes in a loose cluster. These duck-billed dinosaurs are almost as long as the Triceratops, though more lightly built, their tails held straight out behind them as they move from one patch of vegetation to another. Their heads, elongated and flat, work steadily through the low-growing plants, the sound of their chewing audible even from a distance. From time to time, one lifts its head to glance around, its large eyes scanning for movement. Though they lack the horns and frill of the Triceratops, they have their own defenses, speed, keen senses, and the safety of the herd. Farther away still, near the edge of the tree line, the sunlight glints off something low and armored. It is an ankylosaurus, its back covered in a mosaic of bony plates like the tiles of a living fortress wall. At the end of its tail swings a massive club, heavy enough to shatter bone. This is a creature that meets the threat of predators not with flight, but with the promise of devastating retaliation. It moves slowly, its squat body swaying slightly with each step, stopping now and then to crop the low plants with its beak. Even from here, you can feel the weight of its presence. The Ankylosaurus and the Triceratops share an understanding born of similar needs. Both are heavy, low-slung plant eaters, both carry formidable defensive weapons, and both depend on the abundance of this land to fuel their great bodies. Though they are not companions, they are co-tenants of the same ancient territory, and their coexistence is a testament to the diversity of forms life has taken here. High above, the shadow of a great wing passes over the meadow. You look up in time to see a Quetzalcoatlus, one of the largest flying creatures ever to exist, gliding effortlessly on the thermal currents. Its wings stretch wider than the height of a modern giraffe, and its long, toothless beak gleams faintly in the light. It is not a threat to the Triceratops. It seeks smaller prey, or perhaps carrion, but its silhouette is a reminder that the skies here are as alive with giants as the ground. And yet, in this land of titans, there is one presence that shapes the lives of all the others more than any other: the Tyrannosaurus rex. Though you do not see it yet, you feel the weight of its possibility in every cautious glance the herbivores give to the horizon. This predator, towering on two muscular legs, is the master of ambush and force. Its jaws can crush bone, and its senses, especially smell, are keen enough to detect prey from miles away. Every creature here, from the swift-footed Edmontosaurus to the armored Ankylosaurus, must account for it in the way they move, feed, and rest. The Triceratops, for all its size and armament, is no exception. Its horns and frill may give it the means to fight back, but to risk such an encounter is to risk injury or death. Instead, much of its survival depends on awareness. Even in the company of other herbivores, the Triceratops keeps its head lifting regularly from the plants, scanning the tree lines, watching for any sudden stillness in the birds or the rustle of a large body moving through the undergrowth. Life here is a balance. Each giant plays a role, and each shapes the world for the others. The Edmontosaurus's constant grazing opens up spaces where new plants can sprout. The Ankylosaurus, in turning over low vegetation and disturbing the soil, may help certain plants spread their seeds. The Triceratops, in breaking branches and trampling paths, creates roots through the dense forest edge that smaller creatures can follow. Even the predators contribute to this balance, keeping herbivore populations from stripping the land bare. On the far side of the floodplain, the sun glances off the water as a smaller herd of Edmontosaurus crosses the shallows. Their movement stirs up fish and turtles, sending ripples across the glassy surface. The Triceratops watches briefly before returning to its meal, tearing a frond from a cycad and grinding it between its powerful jaws. The presence of so many large animals in the same area speaks to the fertility of the land. Here the plants grow quickly enough to sustain multiple giants without one outcompeting the other. Occasionally their paths intersect. A feeding Triceratops may find itself side by side with an Edmontosaurus at the edge of a meadow, each focusing on different plants, ignoring the other entirely. The Ankylosaurus, less tolerant of close company, may simply lumber away if approached. And always, there is the unspoken agreement that any sudden disturbance, a predator's appearance, a loud crash from the forest, will see them all turning their attention to the threat, regardless of their differences. These relationships are not alliances in the human sense. They are the result of shared space, shared needs, and the unspoken rules of coexistence in an ecosystem that has been in motion for millions of years. The Triceratops, though armed and formidable, is just one part of this living network. A titan among other titans, each as perfectly suited to its role as the Triceratops is to its own. As the day wanes, the shadows of these giants stretch long across the land. The Edmontosaurus herd begins to drift toward the forest, seeking the cover of the trees for the night. The Ankylosaurus moves into denser vegetation, its armor blending with the mottled light of dusk. The Triceratops lingers in the open a little longer, cropping the last of the low plants before the darkness settles in. In this moment, you see the truth of its place here, not as a solitary marvel, but as part of a greater whole, one voice in a chorus of ancient life that fills the air with movement, sound, and purpose. Tomorrow, these titans will rise again with the sun, resuming the endless work of survival, each shaping and being shaped by the others. But for tonight, as the first stars blink into the Cretaceous sky, the meadow grows still. The great forms fade into shadow, their outlines softening until they are part of the land itself. The night belongs now to the smaller creatures, the rustling mammals in the undergrowth, the insects singing in the reeds, and the distant wing beats of a pterosaur crossing the moon. The giants will rest, their battles and feedings and cautious watchfulness set aside until dawn. And in the darkness, somewhere beyond the reach of your sight, a new presence stirs, a predator moving silently through the forest, drawn by the scent of the day's activity. It is here that the delicate balance of this land will be tested once more, and where the Triceratops' strength will meet the sharp reality of the hunt. The Cretaceous night is thick with sound. The air hums with the rasping calls of insects, the quiet splash of something moving through the shallows, the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a passing breeze. Above it all, the moon hangs low and pale, its light filtering through the canopy and laying silver paths across the open meadow. The giants that roamed here in the daylight now stand quieter, their movements slower, each choosing a resting place where their senses can remain alert. Somewhere at the edge of the forest, a shadow moves in silence. It is not the wind nor the passing of a harmless animal. This shadow is heavy, deliberate, and alive with predatory intent. The shape is large, towering over most creatures here, and its gait is purposeful, each step placed with the precision of a hunter. The smell of recent activity hangs in the air, carrying with it the scent of plant eaters that have fed here all day. The predator is Tyrannosaurus rex. Its name is a human invention given millions of years later, but in its own time it needs no title. It is the master of the hunt in this land, a creature whose senses, strength, and killing power are unmatched. Its head, massive and heavy-jawed, moves in small, controlled motions as it samples the air, drawing in scents through its wide nostrils. The smell of a Triceratops is unmistakable, a mix of warm hide, crushed vegetation, and the subtle musk of a large living body. Tonight, the scent is fresh. The Triceratops we have followed lies not far from the meadow's center, resting on its folded legs, its great head angled slightly toward the open plain. Its eyes, half-lidded, still scan the darkness in slow sweeps. Even at rest, this is no careless sleeper. The frill and horns are ready should danger emerge, and the ears catch every change in the night's rhythm. But the Tyrannosaurus does not approach head-on. It moves along the edge of the forest, keeping to the deeper shadows, each step slow and measured. The air is still enough that the predator's movements make little noise. A twig snaps once under its weight, but the sound is swallowed by the larger chorus of nightlife. The Triceratops stirs, shifting its weight slightly but does not rise. At this distance, it cannot yet sense the full danger. The predator is downwind, its scent carried away into the trees. Tyrannosaurus is patient. It does not rush in. This is not the lightning-fast pounce of a smaller hunter. This is the deliberate stalk of a giant whose success depends on surprise and precision. Its long, muscular tail counterbalances the slow advance of its body, keeping its center of gravity steady as it moves between the tree trunks. Every few steps it stops, lowering its head to test the air again, gauging the distance to its target. The moonlight spills across the meadow now, illuminating the resting Triceratops. The predator halts at the forest's edge, eyes fixed on the great horned silhouette. Even from here, the defenses are obvious. The broad frill, the sweeping horns, the sheer bulk of muscle layered over bone. A full-grown Triceratops is no easy kill. The Tyrannosaurus knows this. though not in the language of thought, but in the wordless knowledge etched into its instincts by countless generations of hunts. It shifts its approach. Instead of closing the distance immediately, it circles slowly, using a stand of cycads for cover. The plants sway slightly as it passes, their stiff fronds brushing against its flanks. This movement draws closer to the Triceratops' blind side, the area where its forward-facing horns cannot easily reach. The predator's heavy head stays low, the massive jaws flexing slightly in anticipation. The Triceratops' ears flick toward a faint sound, the whisper of a leaf brushing against scaly skin, the faint thud of a padded footfall. Its head rises now, eyes wide and nostrils flaring. In the space of a breath, it shifts from rest to full alertness, muscles tensing beneath the patterned hide. The horns angle forward, the frill rising like a shield between its neck and whatever comes. The Tyrannosaurus pauses. It knows it has been detected. The distance between them is still enough that the prey could flee, but the predator does not retreat. Instead, it begins to move forward, this time openly, each step deliberate and unhurried. The two giants face each other now in the moonlit meadow, their breaths sending clouds of vapor into the cool air. For a moment there is stillness, a tension so sharp it seems to pull at the edges of the night itself. The predator's eyes gleam faintly, fixed on the space between the Triceratops' horns. The herbivore stands firm, its tail swaying slightly, its massive feet planted deep into the earth. This is not a contest of speed now, it is a test of will. Then, with a sudden rush of movement, the Tyrannosaurus closes the gap in great thunderous strides. The Triceratops meets the charge with its own surge forward, the horns driving ahead like lances. The collision is a deep, resonant crack, horn meeting bone and muscle, with enough force to send both creatures rocking back a step. The predator snaps its jaws, teeth scraping along the edge of the frill but failing to find the vulnerable neck. The two circle now, each testing for an opening. The Tyrannosaurus darts in from the side, aiming for the flank, but the Triceratops pivots sharply, sweeping its horns across the path of the massive skull. The predator withdraws just in time to avoid a full impalement, but one horn scrapes along its jaw, leaving a shallow groove. These exchanges continue in bursts, sudden rushes followed by cautious circling. The predator's strength lies in its bite, in delivering a single, bone-crushing clamp to a vulnerable area. The Triceratops' defense is in denying that opportunity, keeping its horns and frill between its foe and its own softer tissues. Each knows the other's capabilities well enough that this is not a reckless fight. Eventually, the Tyrannosaurus shifts its tactics. It feints a rush from the front, then swings wide, trying to slip behind the Triceratops. The horned giant turns with surprising speed, its tail lashing the ground, but the predator is already pulling back, unwilling to commit to a strike that might leave it vulnerable to those horns. Minutes pass in this dance, the sounds of their breathing loud against the backdrop of night. Neither has yet gained a decisive advantage. The Tyrannosaurus knows that injury here could mean death in the days ahead, and the Triceratops knows that even victory might cost it dearly. Survival for both is not just about winning, it is about avoiding the loss that ends the game entirely. At last, the predator withdraws a few steps. Head high, its breath ragged in the cool air, it watches the Triceratops for a long moment, then turns, retreating into the shadows of the forest. The hunt is over for now. Perhaps it will find easier prey before the night ends, or perhaps hunger will drive it to try again another day. The Triceratops stands motionless until the last sound of the predator's footfalls fades. Only then does it lower its head, exhaling in a long, steady breath. The meadow is quiet again, save for the distant songs of insects and the gentle rustle of the plants. It steps slowly toward a new resting place, one with a clearer view of the surrounding land, and settles once more into the rhythm of the night. In this encounter, no blood was spilled, yet the truth of their relationship is clear: predator and prey, each a master of its own form of power, bound together in the eternal push and pull that shapes the lives of all creatures. For the Triceratops, the night will end in peace, but the knowledge of danger lingers, an awareness that in this land survival is always earned. Ahead lies another part of its story, not in the living flesh of the animal, but in the silent testimony of its bones, preserved through deep time in the stone that will one day speak of its world. The Triceratops we have followed moves on into the darkness, its living body disappearing into the cover of trees, but our journey with it does not end here. Time itself will take over now, carrying this creature forward beyond the span of its own heartbeat, beyond the last rustle of leaves as it passes from sight, into a future it could never have imagined. For even in death, the Triceratops story will continue, written not in sound or movement, but in the patient language of stone. The process begins quietly. When a Triceratops falls, whether to age, illness, or the claws of a predator, the end is swift for the living body, but slow for the remains. The bones lie exposed for a time, visited by scavengers both great and small. Insects crawl along the crevices, birds pluck away at softer tissues, and smaller mammals gnaw on the edges for the minerals locked within. Rain falls, the sun rises and sets, seasons shift, the body loses its scent, its shape, its color. What is left is pale, heavy, and silent. If the bones are fortunate, and fortune here is measured in geological chance, they will not remain on the surface for long. A flood may sweep through, depositing silt and sand that bury the remains in a protective blanket. Volcanic ash may drift down in a sudden smothering layer. Even a slow accumulation of wind-blown sediment can be enough to begin the work. Under that cover, a transformation begins. Groundwater seeps through the soil, carrying dissolved minerals. Over years that pass without number, these minerals seep into the porous structure of bone, replacing its organic material cell by cell until the bone is no longer bone at all, but stone, a perfect replica of the original, locked in a mineral shell. Every ridge, every wear mark, every scar remains, preserved with astonishing precision. Millions of years pass. The land shifts. Rivers carve new paths, mountains rise and crumble. Entire ecosystems appear and vanish. Through it all, the fossil lies in its bed of sediment, untouched and unseen, waiting for the day when chance or human curiosity will bring it back to the light. That moment may come in the swing of a pickaxe or the careful scrape of a paleontologist's trowel. At first it might be just a fragment, a curved piece of frill, the tip of a horn, a tooth shaped like no living animal's. But from that fragment, the rest of the story begins to emerge. Each piece uncovered is a sentence in the long-forgotten biography of a single Triceratops. In the hands of scientists, the stone bones are cleaned, measured, studied. Their weight and structure reveal the age of the individual, the presence of old injuries, even hints of its diet from chemical traces locked within. A healed puncture in the frill may tell of a battle survived. A certain wear pattern on the teeth might reveal the type of plants it preferred. These fossils are not just relics, they are witnesses. And as much as they serve science, they also serve imagination. When the skull of a Triceratops is lifted from the earth for the first time in 68 million years, it does not simply belong to the past, it becomes part of the present. Children will stand before it in museums, staring up at the sweeping frill and horns, imagining the living creature that once bore them. Artists will trace its outline in ink and paint, giving it skin and color and movement once more. Writers will weave it into stories, making it live again in words. In this way, the Triceratops moves through two kinds of history: the biological history of its own life and the cultural history it begins to shape the moment its bones are found. Fossils bridge the impossible gap between these histories. They allow us to hold in our hands something that once moved, breathed, and fed in a world no human has ever seen. Even the smallest fragments matter. A single tooth, eroded and weathered, can confirm the presence of Triceratops in a particular layer of rock. A trackway pressed into ancient mud can hint at its gait, its speed, the softness of the ground on the day it passed. Sometimes entire skeletons are found, lying as if the animal had only just fallen. Other times the pieces are scattered, jumbled by water or scavengers, a puzzle that will take years to reassemble. Every discovery adds to a growing mosaic, not just of Triceratops, but of the entire Late Cretaceous world. A jawbone here, a frill there, a set of ribs weathering out of a hillside. Each is a page torn from a book we are still learning how to read. And in piecing those pages together, we begin to see the full shape of the story. A world of vast plains and dense forests, of herds and solitary wanderers, of predators in the shadows and the endless green of a plant-eater's paradise. There is a quiet poetry in the idea that the Triceratops story is told twice, first in the language of life, then in the language of stone. One speaks of breath and movement, the other of endurance and memory. Both are essential. Without the life, the bones would mean nothing. Without the bones, the life would be forgotten. And so, from a meadow bathed in Cretaceous moonlight to a slab of rock on a modern laboratory table, the journey continues. The Triceratops lives on not only in the earth beneath our feet, but in the minds of those who study it, those who imagine it, and those who even for a moment feel the shadow of its horns pass over them in thought. From here, our path leads toward change, not the slow, patient change of fossilization, but the sweeping, relentless changes of the Late Cretaceous world itself, shifts that would shape the final days of this great creature's reign. The Late Cretaceous was not a static backdrop for the life of the Triceratops. It was a world in motion, geologically, climatically, and ecologically. To walk through it is to step into a landscape caught in the midst of long, sweeping changes, some so gradual that no creature could perceive them in a single lifetime, and others abrupt enough to reshape entire regions within a season. In the world of 68 million years ago, the map of North America was different from what we know today. A great inland sea, the Western Interior Seaway, stretched like a shimmering artery through the heart of the continent, dividing it into two great land masses. To the west lay Laramidia, the long, narrow strip of land that the Triceratops called home. To the east lay Appalachia, a separate realm with its own creatures and climates. The presence of this inland sea shaped everything. The patterns of rainfall, the migration of rivers, the distribution of plants. Moisture-laden winds from the sea brought heavy rains to the coastal plains, feeding the lush vegetation that sustained the giant herbivores. But those same waters could shift their boundaries over time. In some years, flooding transformed lowlands into wetlands and swamps, changing the composition of the plant life almost overnight. In others, retreating waters left behind new meadows, the soil rich with nutrients that encouraged a riot of growth. Far to the west, mountains were rising. The slow but relentless force of tectonic plates pushed the land upward, creating ranges whose peaks scraped the sky. These mountains were young, raw-edged and still growing, sending cascades of rock and soil down into the rivers that carried them eastward. Over thousands of years, this sediment built the fertile floodplains where the Triceratops grazed. But these same forces could also disrupt the land, triggering earthquakes or redirecting rivers in ways that reshaped entire habitats. The climate, too, was shifting. The Late Cretaceous was warm compared to the world we know now, with little or no permanent ice at the poles. Yet within that warmth were subtle variations, cycles of wetter and drier years, periods of increased storm activity, and gradual trends toward cooler or warmer conditions. To a human observer, these changes might have been invisible, but for creatures whose survival depended on the seasonal rhythm of plants, even small shifts could ripple through the ecosystem. Some years, flowering plants flourished in abundance, filling the air with sweet pollen and covering the ground with edible leaves and stems. Other years, the same areas might be overtaken by tougher, more fibrous plants like cycads and conifers, forcing herbivores to adjust their feeding patterns. These changes could influence the movements of Triceratops, drawing them into new territories or encouraging them to linger longer in areas with reliable resources. There were also more sudden disturbances. Volcanic activity along the western edge of Larimedia sometimes sent plumes of ash into the atmosphere, darkening the skies and coating the land in fine, abrasive dust. For days or weeks after such an event, the plants would bear a grey film, their leaves rasping under the bite of herbivore teeth. Water sources might become cloudy or bitter-tasting, forcing animals to travel farther in search of clean drinking spots. Yet, even in these disruptions, life persisted. Plants adapted to the cycles of flood and drought, fire and ashfall, developing strategies to survive and regrow. Herbivores like the Triceratops, in turn, adapted to the changes in plant availability, their powerful jaws and varied diet, allowing them to shift between food sources as needed. It is important to remember that the Triceratops world was not isolated from its own influence. The feeding habits of large herbivores shaped the vegetation just as the vegetation shaped them. Over decades, a feeding territory could change character, forest edges pushed back by constant grazing, meadows expanding where tall plants once grew, or certain plant species flourishing because they were less palatable to the giants that roamed here. And in the background, always, was the slow drumbeat of extinction and evolution. New species appeared, adapted to the changing environment, while others faded from the fossil record. The Triceratops itself was a relatively late arrival in the age of the dinosaurs, evolving from earlier horned dinosaurs and refining the features, the solid frill, the sweeping brow horns that made it so distinctive. On a smaller scale, the rhythms of the seasons shaped daily life. The wet season brought a surge of plant growth, the rivers swelling with meltwater from distant mountains. Meadows burst into green, ferns unfurling new fronds, flowers opening in bursts of color. The dry season brought more muted tones, grasses yellowing in the sun, streams shrinking to narrow channels, leaves crisping on the edges. For the Triceratops, these shifts dictated movement, diet, and even social behavior. The predators of this world were also bound to these changes. In wetter years, prey animals might be scattered, grazing in many different areas, making hunting more difficult. In leaner times, herbivores might gather more closely around remaining food sources, offering predators both opportunity and risk. More prey in one place, but also more eyes and defenses ready to turn against them. From our vantage point, it is tempting to see this world as eternal, the same rivers flowing, the same forests standing for countless years, but the fossil record tells another story. Even in the relatively short span between the earliest and latest known Triceratops, changes are visible in the size and shape of horns, in the proportions of frills, in the types of plants found in association with their remains. Life was responding constantly to the world's shifts, just as it does today. There is a quiet resilience in this picture. The Triceratops did not live in a fragile, unchanging paradise, but in a dynamic, often unpredictable land. It thrived not because the world was constant, but because it could adapt, altering its movements, its diet, and perhaps even its social patterns in response to the shifting stage beneath its feet. But there were changes coming that no adaptation could withstand, beyond the cycles of flood and drought, beyond the rise and fall of mountain ranges. The Earth was moving toward a singular event, sudden, catastrophic, and final for the great dinosaurs. The world was changing in ways that even the most adaptable could not survive. For now, though, the meadow remains green, the rivers clear, and the forests thick with life. The Triceratops lowers its head to crop another mouthful of fern, unaware of the shadow that looms in the far future. To it, the world is eternal. The patterns of the seasons and the shapes of the land as fixed as the stars that glimmer faintly overhead. In the chapters to come, we will follow it into those final days, not as a sudden end, but as the continuation of life's daily rhythm, even in the last moments before the age of the dinosaurs comes to a close. The sun rises over Larimedia, spilling gold across the wide floodplain. It catches the mist that clings low to the ground, turning it into a glowing haze, and lays long shadows from the trunks of ancient conifers. The air is warm even at this early hour, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and the sharper notes of resin and crushed leaves. This is the Triceratops world, still green, still full of life, still turning through its ancient cycles. And yet, though the land seems as it has always been, these are the closing moments of an age. For the Triceratops, there is no foreknowledge of what is to come. It feeds, moves, rests, and watches, just as its ancestors did for millions of years. Around it, the ecosystem hums with the same activity that has sustained it for generations. Edmontosaurus graze in loose herds, their low calls rolling like distant thunder across the plain. Small mammals dart between the roots of ferns, collecting seeds in the cool shade. Pterosaurs wheel high above, their wings catching the morning thermals. From the edge of the forest, the deep bellow of another Triceratops answers from far away, not an alarm but an announcement of presence. The days begin, as they always have. The great horned face lowers to strip leaves from a cycad, the sharp beak cutting cleanly through the fibrous stems. Jaw muscles bunch and release in a steady rhythm as the teeth grind the plant matter into pulp. Between mouthfuls, the Triceratops lifts its head, scanning the surrounding meadow. The sky is bright, the wind gentle, the sounds of the land familiar. Yet the signs of a changing world are there for those who could read them. Some plants bloom later than they once did, responding to subtle shifts in seasonal patterns. Certain flowers open less profusely, while others, tougher, more drought-resistant, creep into places they once did not grow. The rivers run a little lower in the dry season, their banks less stable, more prone to collapsing into the water after sudden storms. The air on some days carries a faint haze from distant volcanic activity, enough to tint the sun's light slightly. None of this is enough to unsettle the rhythm of daily life. The Triceratops adapts without thought, feeding on what is available, moving to where the water is cleanest. It has done so all its life, yet we, standing in the long perspective of history, can see how these subtle changes are the quiet preludes to something far greater. Predators still roam as they always have. The Tyrannosaurus is a constant shadow on the edges of memory, its presence felt even when unseen. The Triceratops keeps its senses tuned for the signs, the sudden stillness of birds, the faint shift in the wind's scent. But encounters are not daily occurrences. Most days pass in peace. It is the constant readiness, the ever-present possibility, that shapes the way the Triceratops moves and rests. By midday, the heat shimmers over the plain, and the Triceratops finds the shade of a stand of conifers. The ground here is cool, carpeted with needles, and the filtered light paints dappled patterns over its hide. It folds its legs and lowers its massive bulk into a resting position, horns angled forward even in repose. Nearby, a smaller individual, perhaps a juvenile, feeds quietly, staying within sight. If this is a parent and offspring, their bond is not expressed in constant contact, but in the simple act of remaining near, a silent agreement of protection. From this resting place, the world unfolds in small details. The hum of insects, the occasional rustle of a lizard moving through dry leaves, the distant crack of wood as something large passes through the forest. A breeze carries the scent of blooming flowers from the meadow's edge, mingled with the musk of other herbivores. The Triceratops dozes lightly, ears twitching now and then at an unfamiliar sound. Evenings in this world are slow and rich. As the heat fades, the land becomes a tapestry of movement again. Herds drift back into the open to graze under the softening light. Calls echo from every direction, short, deep sounds that travel far in the still air. The Triceratops feeds once more before nightfall, cropping ferns and cycads, grinding them methodically. The sky shifts from gold to deep blue, the first stars appearing above. In these final days, there is nothing to suggest that the age of the dinosaurs is about to end. The balance of predator and prey remains, the plants still grow, the rivers still run. Life has endured through countless cycles of change before, and to every creature alive now, It seems this too will continue forever. But above this world, far beyond the clouds, a different story is taking shape. In the vastness of space, a rock more than 6 miles across is on a collision course with Earth. It does not know its destination, and the Triceratops cannot see it, yet it is already falling, pulled by the same gravity that holds the moon in its place. It will arrive in mere moments on the geological clock, though for now millions of heartbeats remain before it strikes. For the Triceratops, there will be no warning. Its kind has survived countless challenges: drought, predators, competition, shifting landscapes, and so it will meet tomorrow as it always has, with the same steady strength and quiet vigilance. It will graze the meadows, guard its young, and stand watch over the land it knows. It will not sense that the stars above hold a harbinger of an ending beyond its comprehension. And so, these last days are lived without tragedy, without the weight of foreknowledge. They are filled instead with the same ancient patterns: the bellow across the plain, the scrape of beak on branch, the slow procession to water in the early light. They are days of survival, not as an act of heroism, but as the ordinary business of life in a world that has always demanded resilience. It is perhaps this unawareness that gives these final days their poignancy. We, looking back, see them framed in the shadow of what is to come. The Triceratops, living them, sees only the present, the freshness of morning grass, the safety of shade, the companionship of another nearby. For it, there is no final. There is only now. Tomorrow will come, and with it, another sunrise over the floodplain. The giants will rise and move again through the green expanse, unaware that each step is carrying them toward the end of an age. And when the moment arrives, when the sky ignites and the ground trembles, it will be sudden, without time for understanding. But for now the meadow lies quiet under the stars, the great horned face resting in the cool night air. The breath rises and falls, the heart beats on, and the world turns, carrying it forward into the last chapters of its story. For millions of years, the heavens have been a constant companion to the life of the Late Cretaceous, an endless dome of blue by day, a map of stars by night. The sun rises, arcs across the sky, and sets. The moon waxes and wanes. Meteors sometimes streak briefly across the darkness, burning away in silent beauty. None of these patterns have ever been cause for alarm. But one morning, a new light appears. At first it is faint, barely more than a pinprick against the fading stars. It grows each night, brighter and larger, until it rivals the moon. The creatures below take no notice. They do not understand celestial omens. The Triceratops still lowers its head to graze, still walks the familiar paths to water, still rests under the shade of ancient conifers. It has no way to know that this new light is no star at all, but a vast body of rock and metal hurtling toward the Earth. When the moment comes, it is not gradual. The asteroid, more than 6 miles across, slams into what will one day be the Yucatan Peninsula, striking with the force of billions of nuclear weapons. In a fraction of a second, the impact vaporizes rock, soil, and seawater, blasting it high into the atmosphere. A shockwave races outward faster than the speed of sound, flattening forests, boiling shallow seas, and setting vast swaths of land ablaze. Here, far to the north in Laramidia, the Triceratops does not see the impact itself, but it feels the world change. The first sign is a deep, rolling tremor beneath its feet, the earth shifting as if it were suddenly alive. Birds explode from the trees, their cries sharp and urgent. Herds of Edmontosaurus break into motion, their tails stiff, their heads swinging as they search for the source of the disturbance. The air seems to shiver with the force of something beyond the horizon. Minutes later, the sound arrives. A roar so deep and vast that it is not just heard but felt in the bones. It rolls over the land like the voice of the earth itself, echoing off mountains, rumbling through valleys, flattening grass with its sheer vibration. Then comes the wind. It is not the gentle, cooling wind of a passing storm, but a wall of air moving faster than any creature can run. It bends trees like saplings, rips leaves from branches, sends loose debris swirling into the sky. The Triceratops braces against it, lowering its head, planting its feet deep into the soil. The frill catches the blast, the horns angled toward the onslaught as though facing down an invisible predator. The wind carries the heat of distant fires and the sharp tang of scorched earth. In the days that follow, the world changes further still. The sky grows darker, not with storm clouds, but with a haze that thickens until the sun itself is a dim, orange disk. The fine dust from the impact, mingled with soot from burning forests, spreads across the globe, carried by winds to every corner of the planet. The air smells faintly of ash, and the light that filters through has the strange, muted quality of late evening, even at midday. For a time, life continues. The Triceratops still moves from meadow to forest, still feeds on the plants it can find, but the plants themselves begin to wither. Without full sunlight, their growth slows. The flowers close, the leaves turn pale, the air cools, the nights stretching colder than any in memory. Hunger begins to creep in. The once verdant meadows turn sparse. The cycads and ferns that once grew thick along the riverbanks grow brittle, their fronds drooping toward the ground. The Edmontosaurus herds grow restless, moving farther and farther each day in search of food. Even the Ankylosaurus, once content to graze slowly through its territory, is forced to wander into unfamiliar ground. Predators feel the change as well. The Tyrannosaurus still hunts, but it finds fewer prey in the places it once relied on. Hunger drives it to take greater risks, to approach larger, better defended herbivores like the Triceratops. Battles that were once rare become more frequent, more desperate. The cold deepens. Nights bring frost that silvers the edges of the plants. The rivers shrink. Fed by fewer rains, their surfaces sometimes crusted with thin layers of ice. The air is unnervingly still, the usual chorus of insects and birds diminished. The land seems to be holding its breath. Weeks stretch into months. The dust in the sky does not clear. With each passing day, the food grows scarcer, the competition fiercer. Weakened animals fall to predators or to the simple exhaustion of hunger. The Triceratops, though strong, must travel farther between meals, spending more energy to find less reward. Its muscles are still powerful, its horns still sharp, but its sides grow lean, the great body consuming its reserves to stay alive. Yet even in this grim time, the instincts remain. When a predator approaches, the Triceratops still lowers its head, still plants its feet, and readies its horns. When another of its kind draws near, it still issues low, rumbling calls, whether to warn, challenge, or simply acknowledge. Life continues in fragments, in echoes of what it was before the sky changed. But the world is no longer the same. The plants that once formed the base of the food chain are dying faster than they can regrow. The cold lingers. The dark lingers. The giant herbivores, already weakened, become fewer in number. Each loss sends ripples upward through the food web, starving the predators, emptying the skies of the great pterosaurs, silencing the forests. And then, as months become a year, the silence spreads. The meadows that once shook beneath the footfalls of Triceratops lie empty. The fronds of the cycads turn brown and collapse into the soil. The rivers run thin and quiet. The land remembers their presence only in the faint depressions of old tracks, slowly filling with wind-blown dust. The end is not a single moment, but a long, drawn-out curtain fall. Somewhere, perhaps, the last Triceratops still grazes, its breath steaming in the cold air, its head lifting now and then as though listening for a call that will never come. When it finally lays down to rest, there will be no witness. The earth will take it back in silence, as it has taken back all things. The age of the dinosaurs, which began in a world warm and green and teeming with reptilian life, ends in a chill and a hush. The Triceratops, the horned titan of Laramidia, will never rise again in the flesh. but in the stone bones it leaves behind, in the layers of earth that record its passing, its story will remain for those who come long after to find it. In the time ahead, new creatures will rise, the air will clear, the sun will return, and life will begin its slow work of rebuilding. But for now, the land lies in the quiet aftermath of the great extinction, holding the memories of all it has lost. And in that silence, the image of the Triceratops endures, the broad frill, the sweeping horns, the steady eyes, as though waiting in the deep folds of time to be remembered. 68 million years have passed since the last Triceratops lowered its head to feed. The floodplains have shifted into deserts, mountains have risen and crumbled, and the great inland sea has vanished entirely. The world is unrecognizable to the giants who once walked it. Their bones lie buried deep beneath layers of stone, sealed away in darkness, pressed under the weight of centuries. And yet, the story of the Triceratops is not finished. The first echoes are faint, fragments of fossilized bone weathering out of a hillside, a horn tip protruding from eroded rock, a curious shape glimpsed by someone passing through a remote badland. Long before science could name them, such discoveries sparked the human imagination. Ancient peoples who stumbled across strange, enormous bones sometimes wove them into their myths, perhaps the remains of great beasts from the dawn of creation, or the bones of monsters that roamed the earth in forgotten ages. These early encounters were the first whispers of the Triceratops calling out across time. Centuries later, with the rise of paleontology in the 19th century, those whispers became clearer. Fossil hunters, armed with picks, shovels, and an unyielding curiosity, began to explore the fossil-rich expanses of the American West. In the dusty badlands of what is now Montana, Wyoming, and South Dakota, they uncovered skulls so massive they strained the imagination. These skulls bore the unmistakable hallmarks of the Triceratops: a solid frill, two great brow horns, and the shorter nasal horn that together gave the creature its enduring name, three-horned face. The first formal description of Triceratops came in 1889, when the renowned paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh recognized it as a distinct genus. In the decades that followed, more and more specimens emerged from the earth, each one adding a new piece to the puzzle of its life. For scientists, these were not just bones, they were messages from an ancient world, written in the language of anatomy and preserved in the unyielding patience of stone. In the public's imagination, however, the Triceratops became something more than a scientific specimen. Its form, reconstructed in drawings and models, had a grandeur that captured hearts as well as minds. Unlike many other dinosaurs, it carried an immediate familiarity. It was both alien and oddly relatable. The great horns gave it the presence of a warrior. The frill lent it a sense of ceremonial majesty. Its herbivorous diet suggested that, unlike the sharp-toothed predators, it did not live by the hunt, but it was still armed, still strong, still capable of standing its ground. By the early 20th century, Triceratops skulls were a centerpiece in museum halls. Visitors would gaze upward at these colossal relics, marveling at the size and imagining the living animal striding through prehistoric meadows. For children especially, the Triceratops became a favorite, not because it was gentle, but because it was powerful in a way that did not require predation. It stood as a champion of defense, a reminder that survival could come through resilience as much as through dominance. As the 20th century progressed, the image of the Triceratops spread beyond museum walls. It appeared in books, films, and eventually television. It became a fixture of the dinosaur pantheon in popular culture, often portrayed squaring off against Tyrannosaurus rex in dramatic battles. The clash of horn against tooth, of defender against attacker. These depictions, while sometimes exaggerated, kept the animal alive in the collective imagination, ensuring that generations would know its name and its form. But the Triceratops' echoes through time are not limited to entertainment. For scientists, it remains a subject of ongoing discovery and debate. Questions about its behavior, its growth, and even its identity have fueled decades of research. One of the most famous debates, whether Triceratops and its close relative Torosaurus are actually the same species at different life stages, has prompted intense study of skull morphology and bone texture. Each fossil discovered offers another clue, and yet the mystery persists. Modern technology has only deepened our ability to hear these echoes. CT scans of fossil skulls reveal internal structures once hidden, from the arrangement of sinuses to the patterns of blood vessels in the frill. Chemical analysis of fossilized teeth can suggest seasonal changes in diet. Even the microscopic structure of the bone can reveal whether an individual was still growing or had reached full maturity. Through these methods, we come closer to seeing the Triceratops not just as a static skeleton but as a living animal, with muscles and skin, senses and instincts, a heartbeat and a place in its world. And as we learn more, the emotional resonance of the Triceratops deepens. It is a creature of paradox, heavily armored yet vulnerable to extinction, massive and strong yet dependent on the fragile balance of its ecosystem, long vanished yet vividly alive in our collective mind. It speaks to the enduring fascination humans have with life that came before us, with the worlds that existed long before our own. There is a moment familiar to anyone who has stood before a Triceratops skull in a museum. You find yourself looking into the hollow sockets where its eyes once were, and for a heartbeat you imagine it looking back. You see it not as a fossil, but as it might have been, breathing, moving, turning its head to survey the meadow. The horns are not just ornaments, they are weapons that have tasted the strain of battle. The frill is not just bone, it is a living shield, coloured and patterned in ways we can only guess. And in that moment, the gap of millions of years narrows. The echoes of the Triceratops reach us not just through stone, but through the ways we integrate it into our understanding of life's history. It becomes a symbol of the resilience and vulnerability of all living things. Its story reminds us that even the most dominant creatures can vanish, that the balance of life is delicate and ever-changing. It also reminds us that memory can span more than human history, that through science we can hear the voices of creatures whose last breath came long before our first. In this way, the Triceratops is more than an animal. It is a bridge between worlds, between the lush floodplains of the Late Cretaceous and the climate-controlled halls of modern museums, between a reality of survival and the myths we weave about courage and strength. It speaks across time to anyone willing to listen, telling of a life lived fully in its moment, of a world that no longer exists, and of the strange, wonderful fact that part of it still endures in stone and in story. Ahead, our journey will shift once again. From the myths and cultural memory of the Triceratops, we will turn to the forefront of modern science, to the questions still unanswered, the debates still raging, and the discoveries that continue to refine our understanding of this horned giant. For even now, long after its bones turn to stone, the Triceratops still has new things to teach us. The Triceratops may have been gone for tens of millions of years, but its story is far from finished. In fact, in many ways it is more alive today than at any time since it walked the Cretaceous plains, not in flesh and blood, but in the constant process of scientific discovery, a process that takes old bones and breathes new life into them, not by magic but by careful study, evolving technology, and the questions that never seem to end. Paleontology is often imagined as a science of the past, an academic time machine where we simply dust off ancient bones, identify them, and place them neatly in the fossil record. But in reality, it is a science in motion. Every fossil discovery, every new tool, every fresh interpretation can shift our understanding in profound ways. The Triceratops, so iconic in its form that it has been recognized by children for generations, still has secrets it has not yet yielded. One of the most enduring debates is the question of its identity. Is Triceratops truly a distinct genus, or is it merely the younger form of another dinosaur, Torosaurus? This debate began in earnest in the late 20th century, when scientists noticed that Torosaurus skulls tended to be larger, with longer frills that had large openings, fenestrae, in the bone. Some researchers proposed that what we call Torosaurus might simply be fully mature Triceratops, whose frills had lengthened and thinned with age. If this were true, then the two would not be separate species at all, but different life stages of the same animal. To test this idea, paleontologists have turned to bone histology, slicing thin sections of fossil bone to examine its microscopic structure. Under a microscope, the bone tells its story. Younger animals have more vascularized, rapidly growing bone tissue, while older ones show denser, remodeled bone with fewer growth marks. These studies have produced evidence for both sides of the argument, and as of today, the debate continues. Each new skull discovered has the potential to tip the scales one way or the other. Other lines of research focus on the life history of Triceratops, how it grew, how long it lived, and how it changed from hatchling to adult. Juvenile skulls are rare but incredibly revealing. They show shorter horns that curve backward, frills that are proportionally smaller, and overall shapes that would have looked surprisingly different from the formidable adults we picture. As these animals aged, their horns shifted forward, their frills expanded, and their skulls thickened, perhaps as they began to compete for mates or territory. By assembling a growth series from the smallest skulls to the largest, scientists can trace the physical transformation of this dinosaur through its life stages. Beyond anatomy, modern science is probing the chemistry of Triceratops fossils for clues about its diet, environment, and even behavior. Isotopic analysis, measuring the ratios of certain chemical elements within the bones and teeth, can reveal information about what kinds of plants it ate and whether it migrated seasonally. If different individuals show isotopic signatures from widely different regions, it could suggest that Triceratops traveled long distances, perhaps following the growth cycles of particular plants. Then there is the question of the frill and horns, their purpose, their variability, and their role in the animal's life. While defense against predators is the most obvious function, many paleontologists now believe display was just as important. The frill might have been brightly colored or patterned, perhaps changing shade with blood flow in moments of agitation. The horns could have served not just in combat but in visual communication, signaling health, strength, or readiness to mate. Studies comparing the shape and size of frills and horns in dozens of individuals have revealed significant variation, suggesting that individual identity, age, or even sex might have been visible in these structures. Technology has also allowed scientists to reconstruct the biomechanics of Triceratops with unprecedented accuracy. Computer modeling can simulate how the skull absorbed stress during horn-to-horn combat, or how the neck muscles supported the enormous weight of the head. These digital reconstructions can test hypotheses that once relied solely on educated guesswork. For example, some simulations suggest that while the horns were strong, prolonged locking and pushing might have been risky, with a higher chance of injury than once assumed, supporting the idea that much of Triceratops' combat was ritualized rather than purely destructive. Fieldwork continues to expand the known range of Triceratops fossils. New specimens emerge not only from the famous Hell Creek Formation, but also from other Late Cretaceous deposits in North America. Each find adds to the statistical picture of the species, how common it was, what habitats it preferred, and how its population may have changed over time. Some fossil sites contain multiple individuals in close proximity, fueling speculation about whether these were small groups in life or simply the result of post-mortem events like floods or droughts, concentrating carcasses in one area. Remarkably, there have even been reports of preserved soft tissues in Triceratops fossils, microscopic remnants of collagen or blood vessel-like structures locked within the mineralized bone. While such findings are controversial and require careful verification, they offer tantalizing hints that traces of the animal's biology might survive far beyond what was once thought possible. If these traces can be studied in detail, they could reveal everything from pigmentation to aspects of metabolism, deepening our portrait of this ancient herbivore. The science in motion is not confined to laboratories and excavation sites. It also unfolds in the ways we reinterpret museum specimens collected decades or even centuries ago. Old fossils, once mounted for display, are sometimes taken down, scanned, and studied with modern tools, revealing details that were invisible to earlier generations of scientists. New 3D models can be shared digitally, allowing researchers around the world to examine specimens they might never see in person. This constant re-examination keeps Triceratops at the center of paleontology's evolving story. It is a reminder that our understanding of the past is not fixed, but continually reshaped by evidence, technology, and imagination. The dinosaur you saw in a textbook 20 years ago is not exactly the dinosaur we understand today, and the Triceratops of tomorrow's science will likely be more nuanced, more detailed, and perhaps more surprising than we can now guess. In this way, the Triceratops is both ancient and ever new. Its bones were laid down in the earth tens of millions of years ago, yet our knowledge of it is still unfolding, as fresh and alive as any field of study. Each discovery, each debate, each refined model brings us closer to knowing what it was to stand beside it, to hear its low calls, to see the sunlight glint from its horns. And so, science keeps the Triceratops in motion, not walking across the Cretaceous plains, but moving through the corridors of our understanding, shifting shape as new light falls on old bones. It is a journey without a final destination, a story that will keep changing as long as we keep asking questions. From here, our path in this episode will turn once more, away from the analytical focus of research and back toward the poetic. For in the final stretch of our journey, we will look at the Triceratops not just as a scientific subject, but as a timeless symbol, a guardian of memory and imagination that has outlived its own era to stand watch over ours. In the deep hours of the night, when the stars stand sharp and cold above the land, there is a stillness that feels older than time. You can imagine the Triceratops standing there, its broad silhouette etched against the silver horizon, horns rising like ancient lances, frills spread wide like a shield forged by the earth itself. Even in the mind's eye, it is not a creature of the past alone. It is here, present, as real in this moment of imagining as it was on the floodplains of Laramidia. The Triceratops has endured far beyond the span of its living kind. It no longer walks in flesh and blood, but it remains a shape, a presence, an idea that has traveled across 68 million years to stand in the imagination of humankind. In this way, it is more than an extinct species. It is a timeless guardian, holding a place for a world that no longer exists, yet is never wholly gone. It is a guardian in the literal sense, for its life was defined by defense. Its frill and horns were its watchtowers and battlements, its strength a warning to those who would threaten it. But it also guards something less tangible, a memory of the Cretaceous itself. When we think of that final age of the dinosaurs, the Triceratops is there, rooted in the mind alongside the image of Tyrannosaurus, the two bound in an eternal balance of predator and prey. Remove it from that picture, and the landscape feels incomplete, as though something vital has been taken from the story. This endurance is not just the result of its physical form. Striking as that is, it lies also in what the Triceratops represents. In a world of colossal predators and relentless competition, it was a creature that thrived not through speed or cunning, but through steadfastness. Its power was not in the hunt, but in the refusal to be taken easily. It lived by holding its ground, by meeting force with force, by embodying the kind of strength that is quiet until called upon. That image resonates across time. We see in the Triceratops a kind of nobility, a steadfast dignity that makes it easy to imagine it as a symbol, not just of an ancient ecosystem, but of endurance itself. Its stance, with horns forward and frill raised, is one of readiness, of unshakable resolve. It asks no quarter, but it also does not waste its power in needless aggression. In the human world, guardians are often figures who remember what has been lost, who stand as living connections to an earlier time. The Triceratops plays that role for the Cretaceous. Its fossils, unearthed from layers of stone, are physical pieces of a vanished Earth. When we stand before them, we are not just looking at an animal's remains, we are looking through a window into a world that was lush, warm, and filled with creatures unlike any that walk today. The thought of it standing on the ancient plains invites the imagination to wander. You can picture the warm light of a Cretaceous dawn spilling across its back, the dew clinging to the rough texture of its hide. You can hear the low rumble of its call carrying over the meadows, a sound felt more in the chest than in the ears. You can see the flicker of its eye as it watches the horizon, always alert for the movement that might mean danger. These details, though we can never witness them directly, are part of the living presence the Triceratops holds in our minds. There is also something deeply human in the way it has become a touchstone of memory. Many first encounter it as a child, in the pages of a book, in the echoing halls of a museum, in the still frame of an animated film. Its horns and frill make it instantly recognizable, even to those who know little about dinosaurs. For some, it becomes the first fossil they see in person, the first tangible link to a prehistoric reality, and once seen, it stays. That staying power has made the Triceratops a constant companion in our understanding of prehistory. When scientists revise its family tree, adjust their theories about its behavior, or uncover new fossils, it is news that travels quickly beyond the world of academia. This is not true for every dinosaur, but the Triceratops has crossed a threshold into cultural familiarity. It is as much a part of the shared mental landscape as the mammoth or the saber-toothed cat, animals that stir something deep and old in the human sense of wonder. Its role as a guardian extends into the symbolic realm of storytelling. In books and films, the Triceratops often stands as the stalwart defender, the one that meets the predator head-on. This is not far from the truth we read in its bones, that it lived prepared, that it could turn the fury of a charging carnivore into a contest of survival it might win. The fossil record shows us that its armor was not invincible, but it was formidable enough to make even the most fearsome hunters think twice. In thinking of it this way, we also recognize that guardianship is not about immortality. The Triceratops could not guard its own species against the forces that ended the age of dinosaurs. No creature could, but its presence in stone, in art, in the collective memory of humanity, is a form of survival all its own. It did not live forever, but it was not erased. It endured in the one way any living thing can endure beyond its time, by leaving a mark that others carry forward. And that mark is not only in the museum display cases or in the pages of paleontological journals, it is in the mind's image of a time before us, in the way the thought of the Triceratops brings with it a whole world. The plants, the sounds, the other creatures, the warm Cretaceous air. To think of it is to think of an entire environment, as though the animal is the keystone holding the memory of that place together. Standing before its fossil skull today, you might feel a strange stillness. The hollows where its eyes once were are empty, yet there is an undeniable sense of watchfulness about them. The horns still sweep forward with intent. The frill still rises like the wall of a fortress. It is as if, even in stone, the Triceratops has not stopped keeping watch, not over its territory, as in life, but over its story, ensuring that it is not lost in the drift of ages. In this way, the Triceratops is not merely a relic, it is an anchor in deep time, a reminder that life has taken shapes and forms far beyond our own, and that the world we inhabit is built on the foundations of worlds that came before. It connects us to that vast, unfolding story, not as a distant footnote, but as a living chapter we can still read in the lines of its bones. And so, we come to see the Triceratops not just as an animal that was, but as a guardian that is, holding open a space in our imagination for the Cretaceous, and through that space, keeping alive the memory of an Earth filled with beings as strange, powerful, and beautiful as itself. It stands there, horns raised, frill spread, the timeless sentinel of an age that will never come again, yet will never fully be gone. From here, our journey turns to its final moment, the closing reflection, where we step gently back from the floodplains and the forests, from the shadow of the horns and the stillness of the frill, carrying with us the essence of what the Triceratops has shown us tonight. The night has deepened, and the Triceratops has walked with us through the shifting landscapes of its world, from the green meadows of the Late Cretaceous to the quiet silence after the Great Extinction, and onward through the eons to the place it holds in our memory. We have seen it not only as a creature of horn and frill, but as a presence that endures beyond time, a sentinel standing watch over the stories of a vanished Earth. In its life, the Triceratops was part of a living tapestry. The rivers that cut through the floodplains, the plants that swayed under the Cretaceous sun, the other creatures whose paths it crossed in peace or in conflict. In its passing, it became part of an even greater story, one that reminds us that everything we see today rests upon layers of life that came before. It teaches us that strength is not only the domain of those who seek the fight, but also of those who hold their ground with quiet resolve. It shows us that even when the world changes beyond recognition, traces remain in stone, in science, and in the human heart. As we leave its world behind for tonight, the Triceratops remains where it has always been in our imagination, horns lifted toward the horizon, frill spread like the wall of an ancient fortress steady beneath the turning sky, and in that image it will wait for us, ready to walk the meadows again whenever we return to dream of the Cretaceous. Good night.